is held by Assembly members that are in the papers. Does any member have anything else they wish to add? Okay, thank you, members. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. We're recommended to confirm that they are accurate and I can sign them as so. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. The summary list of actions, item 4, we're recommended to note the completed and outstanding actions arising from previous meetings of the committee. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 5 is the core item of business today, which is to consider the first draft of the GLA budget for 2018-19. I'd like to welcome our guests this morning from left to right. David Lunts, the Executive Director of Housing and Land, David Bellamy, who we have seen many times in front of us, the Mayor's Chief of Staff, Martin Clarke, for similar reasons. We've seen him very often, the Executive Director of Resources, and Fiona Fletcher-Smith, the Executive Director of, I'll get this right, Development, Enterprise and Environment. Thank you all very much for giving up your time and welcome to the meeting. Members, as discussed in the pre-meeting, we slightly reordered the questions. David Lunts needs to leave slightly early, so we are switching his questions and bringing them forward, and we're swapping them over for questions 3, which would otherwise go to Fiona. So we'll take those in a separate order. So to get the ball rolling, it's an auspicious day to have this because it's also the National Budget Day today. So I think the opening question to probably to David Bellamy, I think, is what is the Mayor hoping for from today's autumn budget?
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. The committee will have seen the Mayor's article in the Times yesterday setting out some of his thoughts on this. I think just to summarise, clearly funding for the Metropolitan Police and the London Fire Brigade are absolutely key issues. The committee will be very well familiar with the arguments there. The Mayor also will want to see progress with Crossrail 2 with a view to us being able to consult on the route with those potentially affected by that in the new year and to move ahead as quickly as possible with the legislative and related processes. In terms of housing, clearly the Mayor's after a range of measures to help address the housing crisis the city faces. That will include measures related to investment in homes and infrastructure, extra powers around land assembly and planning, and also action on construction skills. And I'm sure that we'll be discussing that in more detail with David later this morning. The Mayor also wants to see real action on air quality, both in terms of a national diesel scrappage scheme, but also powers to manage emissions on the Thames and from construction projects. Finally, the Mayor's keen to see further progress on devolution, building on obviously the signed Health Memorandum of Understanding recently, particularly fiscal devolution, business rate pilot, but obviously the Mayor is keen that over time we go further. And part of that includes the Mayor's support for Westminster City Council's TIF bids to secure extra investment in the capital's West End.
Okay, thank you. And subsequent to that, has the Mayor, or is the Mayor assuming implications for Brexit in the core GLA budget in future years?
So obviously it's difficult to be very precise about what the implications of Brexit may be, because here we are, 17 months in, and there's still a great deal of uncertainty about what the new arrangements will be and how things will play out. At a group level, clearly there are questions about what impact would Brexit have on income. We don't expect any particular impact in regard to council tax, but on business rates, clearly over time, the economic path the city's on, would well be different in whatever regard as a consequence of Brexit, and over time that may feed through in some way to business rates. It's very hard to say more than that, and it's really just another variable that at group level we have to think about when we consider the uncertainties around business rates income. In terms of the GLA itself and its expenditure, the Mayor does agree with the Assembly's EU Exit Working Group the need for a new London fund to replace the European Regional Development Fund and the European Social Fund, which of course we currently manage here. and see it as really important that the proposed shared prosperity funds the government talks about establishing will devolve funding down, because cities and city regions are the people who are best placed to identify those local priorities and create the partnerships that secure effective delivery.
Yes, I think that's one of the points that we will all agree on, actually. Now, moving into some of the figures released in the budget, the GLA cumulative budget is going down by approximately £13 million in the next financial year. Why is that?
Well, I think it's important to note that that's the financing requirement. It's not necessarily the expenditure of the authority. Indeed, Directorate expenditure is forecast to go up by approximately £5 million. Really what the figures, I think, reflect is a number of things moving in different directions. So, for instance, there's a very significant range of revenue capital swaps, which sees money coming out of reserves, out of the capital reserve that exists, and coming through above the line in the Directorate budgets. And then obviously there are corresponding reductions in the individual capital allocations to those programmes. Also on the reserve side, there's extra money being drawn down to address things around the City Hall rent and the smoothing process we have for that. The currently planned profile for the Sport for Social Change programme, where in last year's budget we put that money into reserves, as at that stage there was a lot of work still to do to identify how that programme would work, and also corporate factors. And that, together with the expected interest from GLA land and property, lead to a different picture at the bottom line in terms of financing requirements compared to what the authority is actually planning to spend at this stage next year.
Okay, I think more details of that will emerge as the budget process proceeds. Now, the Mayor's budget guidance in June 2017 set out a number of expectations of the GLA and the GLA family, such as savings and efficiencies for this financial year going through to 2021 should be set out on a cumulative basis as well as a year-by-year basis, and there should be a reconciliation between capital and control totals. That doesn't appear to be present in the draft budget. Why is that?
So the draft budget that the committee has before it is a submission to the Assembly to enable this consultation to take place, which I believe by law has to take place in advance of the later stages of the group budget process. What you'll see is the Mayor's budget guidance doesn't set out requirements about this document. What it sets out is requirements about what must be submitted to GLA Group Finance by next Wednesday the 29th, which, as you say, includes things around savings and efficiencies, capital control reconciliations and so forth. And so that work is being done by officers in the GLA finance team, ready to submit to GLA Group Finance by the deadline. And so that's just proceeding in the normal fashion. Okay.
The savings and efficiencies were present in the draft budget at this stage last year. Is there a reason why that process has changed?
I don't think so. I'm happy to offer some comment to the committee on savings and efficiencies and where we are. So I think the submission does include some notes on topics related to this. So it talks about our investment syndicate with other members of the GLA group and GLA family, now expanding to include the London Borough of Haringey, which results in very significant savings financially for ourselves and other participating organisations. Obviously, we have the shared services arrangements and the proposed expansion of that, where the GLA will provide IT services for LLDC to achieve a saving to the group, which I believe the Oversight Committee has been consulted on behalf of the Assembly tomorrow. And the document also sets out the latest position with regard to collaborative procurement. If I could highlight maybe two things that aren't in the document but are nevertheless material and the committee should be aware of. The first thing, of course, is that when we project ahead our grants and programme budgets into future years, it's assumed that those will all absorb inflation and not, there isn't, as a general case, inflation built into those. And that's a saving to the authority of around £2 million an annum. And also we're doing extra work regarding income sources, which, whilst not a saving in the sense of reducing expenditure, nonetheless improves our financial position. So for a couple of years now, we've been supporting boroughs with projects to reduce council tax and business rate arrears, and particularly identifying commercial properties which may be undervalued or have been omitted from local rating lists. So far, there's been a one-off investment from the GLA of, I think the maximum we're committed to under that scheme is £2.5 million on those projects. And across the next 5 years, we forecast that will give us extra income of around £40 million over the 5 years, i.e. £8 million per year, so a very strong return on investment. And of course, there's a benefit there for the boroughs as well. And that's why the Mayor recently decided to go further and is prepared to support the funding of up to 3 inspectors in each borough to ensure that commercial and residential properties are correctly included in the lists and ensuring that reliefs that are available are applied properly and not abused. Similarly, there's an investment cost to this, but the work we've done to date gives us great confidence that there will be a very significant return on investment to the authority from doing that.
Thank you for that. The final sort of scene-setting question is around key performance indicators. This is something this committee has been zeroing in on for some time, not just in this administration. In the previous administration, my predecessor as the chair of the Budget and Performance Committee was very hot on this topic and managed to sort of persuade the previous administration to introduce a suite of KPIs which the performance of the authority could be measured against. We've been asking for these for 18 months and we still don't see any. And we have been promised them on a number of occasions, both by you, Mr. Bellamy, and also by Mr. Middleton. Where are the KPIs? When can we expect to see them?
So we've obviously got the Q2 reporting process underway, and as part of that, there'll be dashboards in 2 areas: affordable housing and air quality. So those will be submitted for the Budget Monitoring Subcommittee to consider at your meeting on the 13th of December. So that's coming very soon. Officers are working, as you know from previous discussion, we're focusing on 5 areas as a whole. So the other 3 areas, social integration, culture and future economy, are being worked on. And the plan is also to bring the latest drafts of those to the Budget Subcommittee in December in order for to get feedback on those in the same way as was done with affordable housing and air quality. Yeah, because
when we originally asked for these in July of 2016, your response was this is something we'd like to start working on fairly soon. And to be honest, when an administration changes, it's perfectly understandable that you might want to have different metrics by which to measure yourself. You indicated at that time that August 2016 would be when you would start working on them. And a year later, we asked again about them in July 2017, and the Head of Finance and Governance, Mr. Middleton, said that we should probably see the full suite at some point in Q2, or almost at the end of Q3, and we still don't have them. So will we be getting all 5 coming to the Budget Budget Monitoring Subcommittee next month?
That's definitely our aspiration. There isn't any difference between us, I think, in our desire to see these in place. Being frank with the committee, we've had an officer vacancy and a failed recruitment, and that's the key position for pulling this stuff together, and that has impacted progress, and that's something that the senior officer you mentioned is working to address, and all of us want this there and want it to be available as soon as possible. And obviously it's in that spirit that we want to consult on drafts as soon as we have them, because it is important and we want to get Assembly members' feedback and make them as useful as possible in terms of driving the right outcomes for Londoners.
I think speed is now of the essence, if I may say so, because this is the second budget out of 4 in the first term, and we still don't have KPIs. It's going to be very difficult for us to go forward monitoring what the Mayor is achieving or not achieving unless there is transparency, and the KPIs provide an element of that. So I think sooner rather than later would be good at this stage. I'm going to move on to the next section, and the next section is a very interesting one because it's around business rates and the 100% business rate pilot that is being proposed for London. It's a completely new way of funding local government and has big implications both here and in the boroughs. I'm not sure whether it would be you, Mr. Bellamy, or whether Mr. Clarke would be the right person to answer this, but to start off with, how will the proposed pilot change the way the GLA retains business rates and any growth from business rates?
Maybe I start and then Martin can chip in. Where we are, so the committee is aware, is the Mayor and all 33 borough leaders through London councils have agreed a proposal to put to government around 100% business rates retention pilot for the upcoming financial year. At this moment, we await formal confirmation from the government that they're going to, sign that and accept that and implement that. We may find out later today, as we discussed earlier. Time will tell on that. What is very important to understand is that the pilot is about 100% retention of business rates growth. So it's not about, as you know, around £8 billion of business rates money is collected by billing authorities in London each year, and of that, nearly £3 billion is passed to the government, and that will still continue to be the case. London's a net contributor to business rates, which then are redistributed through the top-up and tariff system to other parts of the country. So the core business rate system will remain the same in terms of how the distribution takes place. What we're talking about there is retention of growth, which then is something that will be available to the local authorities and ourselves to spend in line with the restrictions and the agreement put in place with the central government.
The London councils have estimated the business rate growth for next year to be around about £240 million. Is that a figure that you agree? That's a jointly agreed estimate. I mean, given all the vagaries around business rates, it is very much an estimate. But that's the one that modelling has been based around as a kind of a base case. Yeah. What assumptions did you make around making that estimate? The reason I'm asking that question, there's a very complex mechanism for distributing that extra growth, isn't there? And we're not going to know until, I think, next summer how accurate that is. So spending assessments around a figure that may be open to some kind of risk could be dangerous. So are you erring on the side of caution when you come up with that figure, or are you optimistic? So it's summer 2019 is when we'll get the returns from billing officers that will give us confidence in what the figure actually is. So you're quite right, it's a way in the future. I think what I would say is that there is a subtle difference between the analysis one does of the base case on which one can say, yes, right, this is the sort of thing the pilot could deliver to us, and therefore authorities can decide to proceed with, versus actually saying, okay, right, the government's agreed to do this, how are we going to allocate, and how's the Mayor going to allocate the money that results? And clearly, in the Mayor taking decisions about the use of that money, we will need to take a prudent approach, as we do on all business rates matters, given the inherent uncertainty. Okay. So are we expecting to receive any additional income through the pilot? So if you accept the £240 million as the kind of base case,
There are two pots of money that would result from that. The first, and this obviously is in the proposal, and so it's dependent on the government choosing to accept that proposal. The first is there will be a strategic investment pot created of about 15% of the money resulting, so potentially £36 million. And there will be a collective decision-making process between the Mayor and local authorities about how that money will be allocated strategically in London's growth. Obviously then that will include a view on whose budgets that money actually flows through on the way to be expended, whether it's the council, the GLA, a GLA functional body, or indeed another organisation. Of the GLA's own share of the £240 million, which, as we estimate, we're entitled to 36% of that. That would be around £74 million. As we say, it may not turn out to be that number, but that's the kind of a baseline number. It will be for the Mayor to determine how this is spent, but what matters for the government in agreeing to this, if they choose to do that, is that this is about strategic investment, this devolution, and about growing the economy and thus business rate income in future and helping to get us into a virtuous circle. And so in that context, the Mayor has agreed that although it would be his decision as to how this money is spent, it would be used for strategic investment in London and not general GLA or GLA group running costs.
Now, the collective decision-making process between London councils and the Mayor, so there are 33 London boroughs who are working corporately under the umbrella of London councils, and then there's the Mayor. Does it require complete unanimity? So where I'm going with that is if one borough decides to renege on this, does that kill the whole scheme?
So firstly, all boroughs must sign up to the scheme. All leaders have sat in the room at London councils with the Mayor and have agreed to do so. Obviously, it has to formally go through their decision-making processes, but one of the important things about this proposal is that a no detriment clause, so that the scheme will ensure that in the event of business rate income falling, there would be no detriment to any individual local authority, so nobody can be worse off from this. So in that sense, there's no reason for anybody to object to it. So that's the first decision-making point, which is very important to understand. The second point then is about the 15% strategic investment pot, and there is a governance model that's been agreed and outlined for that, which says that decisions there, firstly, they do require the approval of the Mayor of London as one half, if you like, of London government. It also requires approval from London boroughs. It doesn't require approval by all, but it does require more than a 50% majority, and ensures that there isn't any particular region of London that is unhappy with the overall proposal. So there are significant safeguards in there to ensure that that money is used in a way that meets broad agreement across London.
Okay. In the event, I mean, at the moment we're talking about setting up the pilot, and I can understand London councils and the Mayor being aligned on this. But in the event going forward, there is dispute between London councils and the Mayor. Who is the final arbitrator on such a situation?
Well, a positive decision will need to be taken in order for the money to be spent. And so, if proposals are brought forward for that money and then they don't receive support, then the money won't be spent until such time as there is a proposal which commands appropriate level of support under the governance arrangements.
So it would be possible for an impasse to be reached. So, flipping it from here to London councils, are you aware of any mechanism that they have in London Council? So there are 33 boroughs. If 2 or 3, or even 1, doesn't agree with what the rest want to do, does that negate the London Council's position? So the Mayor might be aligned and 30 of the 33 boroughs might be aligned in one direction, 2 or 3 in the other. Would that stop whatever that proposal is from going forward?
No, it wouldn't in that circumstance, because that wouldn't be a sufficient number of authorities to block. From memory, the proposal is that to proceed, a 2/3 majority of local authorities is needed, with the proviso that something could only proceed if it wasn't opposed by all authorities within a sub-region.
Okay, so 2/3 majority at London Councils is what's needed to establish the London Council's position.
Yeah, okay. subject to, as I say, the requirements around sub-regions, so that the proposals are fair across London as a whole.
Okay. Coming away from the governance, looking at the pilots, are you still ring-fencing grants that are rolled into business rates, such as the public health grant?
So the final proposal for this year's pilot doesn't involve public health grants. That was a decision of government, but we've adjusted the figures through the business rate scheme, which ensures that there will be no change in terms of the money that certainly flows to the GLA and the way that this scheme would work, regardless of that change, and that's something that then can be considered in future years.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's important to add, regardless of those grants not being in, you will still get the estimate of £240 million of growth. So it doesn't change that. What it does change is London as a whole is going to pay a higher tariff back into the centre. If those grants had come in, we would have had a lower tariff. But the 240 million estimate does not change.
So essentially, because obviously this is a matter for local authorities, not for us, because we don't receive that money, essentially local authorities still receive those grants, but then have to pay it back to government in extra tariff, so that it's no real difference, but it's just the government took the view that they didn't at this stage wish to include those grants.
Did they give a rationale for that
in this pilot?
Was there a rationale offered by the government for that?
My feeling is government, the various government departments didn't tackle this early enough.
So it was in the too difficult to do box, was it?
Possibly too late to do. Might be better.
Other departments will need. If you take the transport grant as a model, other departments need persuading that changing grant into the business rates does not impact on their ability to influence or control spending if they want to retain that ability. So I think the negotiation still needs to go on within government, the Department of Health, and the government are undertaking to pursue this if in the event that the pilot gets extended. Okay. I think it left it probably too late in the process.
Interesting insight into the world of Yes Minister. Sorry, we shouldn't be facetious in public meetings. Business rates reserve. What progress has been made in building up the reserve, and has the historic deficit been addressed?
So obviously that's the business rate reserve is a group reserve that is there to tackle the uncertainty around future business rate income. So that has been built up this year, and we'll of course build that up in line with the budget that was set out, and clearly what we will be doing as part of the group budget, both in terms of the consultation in December, we'll be applying the knowledge that we've gained around through the year on latest forecasts and opinions, but very importantly will be the returns from local authorities at the end of January, when they say how much business rate income the authority is actually going to receive. And I think it's clear, given the uncertainties, that there is a real prospect that we may end up changing the amount of business rate income we conclude the group is going to receive and have available for expenditure based on those returns at the end of January.
Okay. Now, on business rates, the the Mayor has the power to move business rates income around the GLA family group, and has done so in the past when he gave Mopac an extra £2.5 million last year, for example. The Mayor spent a year talking about police funding, and he's moved £75 million of additional business rates income into TfL as part of the draft budget. Why did he not move that into the Met?
So that is essentially, Martin maybe I'll speak back to the detail of it, but essentially it's a one-off repayment of a loan. I believe under the previous administration, where there was a deficit related to business rates, that was met by taking £75 million from TfL, with the agreement that that would then be repaid back in future, which has been reflected in budget documents consistently, and now we're just honouring that commitment.
So it's a one-off movement rather than an ongoing commitment?
Absolutely, it's a one-off movement. Martin may be able to say more about the history.
What we did in practice in the early years, there was a big deficit on the total amount the GLA has estimated collected business rates. So we didn't pay over £75 million that had been agreed to go to TfL until we're moving into surplus. And that was agreed then, and we're now at a stage where, under that agreement, we're paying what we owe them.
It was a delayed payment rather than a loan then?
Yes, it's a delayed payment. So we've agreed a total amount to go over, and then with their agreement, we've held that amount in the final month.
Okay. Any member got any questions on this section? Assembly Member Prince.
Just on the business rates, it is a very volatile situation, isn't it? And we know that because of the large hike in business rates, we think there's going to be a lot of challenges or appeals, if you want, to business rates. Do we have a handle on that at all? Do we have any sort of projections as to how much we think that will affect us by? Do we know how much delay there will be before we get certain payments because of the appeals and so on?
I'm afraid to tell the committee I fear the situation gets worse. We have a provision on our balance sheet because as of March 2017 there were 54,000 outstanding appeals related to the 2010 rating list. And that obviously starts to work through, and the committee will be aware that the Valuation Office makes less progress in London than the rest of the country because the nature of valuations in London can be more complex, and they're just trying to close down as many schemes as they can. So that's kind of the position where we start from this year. And then obviously with the changes to business rate appeals, the business rates, there's the new check challenge appeal system. Now that both requires more work from people filing appeals so that appeals come along later in the process, but also there have been issues, I understand, with the Valuation Office website, and thus that's delayed things further, and so there have been a relatively small number of challenges to date, and it's hard for us to get a feel for what the likely outcome is going to be. Further, we're concerned that we understand the staffing levels of the Valuation Office are going to be cut by approximately a third, which is around 1,000 posts by 2020. And given that we've got all these backlogs already, and clearly many parts of London have seen very significant increases in business rates, which clearly is an incentive for people to appeal, we're very concerned that rather than tackle the backlogs, the situation actually could get worse. And of course, the only prudent thing we can do in that circumstance is make a prudent provision for what may come to pass. Hence, both the provisions we have and the business rates reserve.
But have we made a provision now in light of what you've said?
We'll look at those factors again, as obviously here we're talking about the GLA budget. When we put the group budget together in December and put that out for consultation, we'll consider what appropriate we need to do, whether we need more in the reserve, whether we need less in the reserve, etc. and then that will be subject to further review as we go through the group budget process, and particularly when we get the returns from the billing authorities at the end of January, which will give us an indication of what they're seeing and what they're expecting as the people kind of closest to the ground on this.
Thank you.
Okay, members, as I said at the outset, we're going to skip over section 3 and return to it later. We're going to move on to section 4 now, which is the affordable housing question, and Assembly Member Berry is going to lead for us.
Thank you very much. Yes, questions to David on housing, which is a crucial issue for everyone at the moment. We recently had the Mayor announce that he estimates, he has the needs document that none of us have seen yet, which says that 66,000 new homes are needed each year, and 65% of these are going to have to be affordable. How is your team incentivising developers and indeed all the other people who are set to deliver new homes, councils, housing associations, community-led plans? How are your team going to deliver those numbers?
Yeah, well, the figures that you've just outlined are of course, based on the new strategic housing market assessment, and the 65% of that very large total that is needed to be affordable is something that we are going to struggle to deliver with the current funding that we have. The Mayor, as you know, has introduced a number of new initiatives to try and address that, probably the highest profile of which is the new approach to the 35% affordable housing planning threshold, which is designed to give a fast track through planning for applicants that come forward with at least 35% affordable housing. And I think that's already showing some real benefits. It's been broadly welcomed by the development industry, and the most recent statistics in terms of referable planning applications to the Mayor show a very significant increase in the levels of affordable housing coming through the planning system in London from the 13% that were approved the year before last. So that's one initiative. I think another is the work that we're doing with government and other agencies around trying to have more influence over the release of public sector land. And I think we had a mention a short while ago about the health devolution package that was announced a week or two ago. And an important component of that is the establishment of a new estates board for London, which for the first time will bring together all of the key players around the National Health Service in London with a new team that will be part of the Homes for Londoners team, which will look to find opportunities to release surplus health estate in London as part of modernising clinical facilities, but also releasing more land for housing. And as you may know, the Mayor has made it very clear that where public land comes forward, he would expect to see at least 50% affordable housing. And that's something that we've taken very seriously on the GLA's own land and the wider GLA group land. So whether it's Transport for London or Core GLA, for instance, we're now looking to increase the levels of affordable housing provision. And in fact, the one site that the GLA has taken forward since the Mayor took office, we acquired a site in Waltham Forest, and that's come forward for 100% affordable housing. So I think we're making some strides in those respects, but ultimately a great deal of the effort to increase affordable housing delivery in London will come down to the level of resource that's available to us. We've got a 3.15 billion settlement for affordable housing starts to 2021. We've been having some pretty intensive negotiations with government about London's share of additional affordable housing that's been announced by government in the recent past. But we estimate that in order to just deliver 50%, never mind 65%, but 50% of the new London plan targets, we would need something like £2.7 billion a year. And to put that into context, our affordable housing budget is currently running at about £500 million a year. So you get a sense there of the gap between the resources that ideally we would need and the level of resourcing that we're currently budgeting.
We'll have some more questions about the land fund later on. If I can ask about the affordable housing settlement and also the budget and the demands that have been put by the Mayor and the councils in the budget. They've been asking for, like you say, an increased affordable housing grant, also relaxation on some of the borrowing requirements for councils, things like right to buy receipts, to resource councils better to deliver more affordable homes as well. But at the moment, if councils, say only the council's relaxing borrowing requirements thing comes in, or only land comes forwards and you haven't got any more grants, how much of your £3.15 billion settlement is now already allocated? How much is left that potentially could be used for new ways of doing things?
Well, at the moment, in terms of the commitments that we've made with partners that have bid for our funding, we've allocated or committed around just over 2.7 billion of that. So we've got about 420 million, which is currently not committed. But I would just say that the government announced a further 1.4 billion of funding for affordable housing nationally some time ago. That's not yet been allocated. So we would certainly expect, I'm sure the Mayor would expect to get a sizable proportion of that. In addition, of course, there was another £2 billion announced by the Prime Minister at the Conservative Party conference. That's not yet been allocated. There's an important settlement due in the new year around the Housing Infrastructure Fund that can support. So there are other packets of money which we've been pressing government to settle urgently, because obviously the sooner we know what those allocations are, the sooner we can get that money allocated to partners to build.
Okay, thank you. In terms of your revenue budget, the money that's actually in the housing and land revenue budget is going down in the coming year compared with what it is this year, and then staying flat through the rest of the period according to the core budget coming out today. How is that useful when you've got so much to do and you've got so many different things on the go? I mean, there's a whole section, there's a whole policy within the housing strategy called diversifying the house building industry, which commits to lots of different ways of supporting new things. Personally, I've been talking about community-led housing. There's a lot of work to be done, also by the viability team. Why is it that your revenue budget is flat? How are you going to support all this stuff?
Well, in fact, we're looking to undertake some new growth initiatives that will involve revenue funding. So, I mean, one of them is the funding support to the Community Housing Hub, where we'll be committing around about £250,000 to that next year. Another is additional staffing that we will be looking to recruit over the next few months to support our new initiatives around land and the new land fund. So there are a range of revenue supports, but quite a lot of the work of my directorate is funded via recharges to Greater London Land and Property, GLA. So some of the budget support for that will be recharged back to our wholly owned land subsidiary rather than core GLA budget. Okay,
and then presumably Transport for London's housing team is still set to grow. We'll see that later, and you will know about that because you work closely with them. I believe you might be moving in with them.
That's certainly the plan. Yes, so we'll be relocating my team to Union Street in 2 or 3 weeks' time. That means that we'll be sitting next door in the same space actually as the OPDC, which will enable us to work more satisfactorily, and we have reserved space for the TfL property delivery team to join us at some point in the future as well. So hopefully that will lead to an even more seamless effort than the one we have at the moment between our respective efforts.
Okay, thank you very much. Finally, just on sort of numbers, we know that the Mayor's committed to 90,000 affordable housing starts, and we've got targets now, annual targets set within the housing strategy. Will you also be making targets for completions? Because that's actually what we've asked in the past. Can those numbers still be put out there so that we can monitor those too?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, we've shifted our key performance indicator from completions to starts for a number of reasons, not least because that's what government asked us to do. And actually that is, I think, more sensible, because the problem with completions targets is that one always ends up with this kind of cliff edge position at the end of a programme period. So our key performance indicators around the programme are starts. But we do, as I think you know, report on completions on a quarterly basis as well to the Assembly, and we will be continuing to do that. So although we don't have specific completions targets, we do report our completions position alongside our starts position on a quarterly basis.
Okay. Thank you. Can I move on to talking about...
Can
Do you want to... Should we carry on with
we have a number
numbers?
We have a number of indications just on this section, Sian. So, firstly from me, really, just a very quick tidying up one. You referred to various different pots of money that the government are going to allocate towards housing, and one of the references was the Prime Minister's speech at the Conservative Party conference. Have you got any indication about when the government are going to decide about the allocations of any of that money?
Well, we've been having... what I hope will be some productive discussions with government around the 1.4 billion, which was the initial additional allocation to affordable housing budgets, as recently as last week. So it's possible that by the time by the time we hear at the end of the budget speech today, there may be more news on that. In terms of the additional allocations, well, there have been discussions, but I think probably not sort of formal negotiations yet around the 2 billion. Government have said that they want to come back to that discussion at some point in the near future. We have also, the other big budget is the Housing Infrastructure Fund, and we made a submission 4 or 5 weeks ago now for 1.7 billion against the government's budget for that. So we are hoping to get some indication of the results of that, possibly this side of Christmas, I suspect probably early in the new year.
Okay. Right, there's quite a bit of interest in this section. I've got Assembly members Prince, Cooper and Pigeon, who caught my eye in that order, so I'll go in that order. So Assembly member Prince.
Thank you. Just on the 2 billion that you mentioned earlier, what would our expectation be? Because what we used to do in Redbridge, if the DCLG announced a figure, we knew we'd roughly get to a 200th of that money, and that wasn't a bad rule of thumb. So what would be our usual expectation on a £2 billion budget?
Historically, London, I mean, going back some time, London historically has won around 40-45% of national affordable housing budgets. We've been making the case quite strongly that, if anything, we should probably get a more generous proportion, bearing in mind that, you know, London has probably the most acute affordable housing crisis in the country, and also the most expensive build costs for all sorts of reasons that we understand. So the relative level of subsidy for affordable housing in London has actually diminished quite considerably over the last few years because of the rising build costs, which have impacted London a lot more seriously than the rest of the country. So, you know, we would expect, or we would certainly anticipate, that the settlement reflects those realities.
That's helpful, thank you. Going on to the housing starts, the affordable housing starts and the 3.1 billion, I've just done a quick back of the envelope calculation, and you say we've committed 2.7 billion. As I understand it, that relates to 79,000 homes, and that means we have an outstanding figure of 11,000, and by my calculations the 400 million pro rata pretty much covers that off. Would you agree with that back of the envelope calculation?
Yes, I mean the programme and the 90,000, as you will appreciate, is built up of some numbers, about 17,000 of what we call legacy programmes, in other words, before the current 16 to 21 programme. So it's about 17,000 of those. The remainder are within the mainstream programme and a number of other programmes, Housing Zone. We are forecasting around about 8,000 starts from that, about 4,500 from our Housing Innovation Fund. And the current position, I can report actually, is There's a lot to do on this, but the current position in terms of allocations actually amount to about 89,000 homes at the moment, taking into account all of the commitments that our partners have given us against that funding.
Okay. So the fund that you got from the government is sufficient to fund the 90,000. Looking at the chart, we've got affordable housing starts. This year has been, I suspect you would say, disappointing. Certainly considering the Mayor promised 50,000 and we've only had 9,000. But the trajectory jumps quite significantly in the following years. Are they realistic? Are they, I mean, for instance, 17-18, we've got a trajectory of between 12,500 and 16,500, I believe, if you've got the papers there. I calculate we're about 6 months through the process. We're talking about starts, not completions, so in that respect it's easier. So could you tell us where we are on the number of starts we've had so far in this fiscal year?
Well, the number of starts actually registered this year to the end of October was only 570, very small number.
570?
570, yeah. However, that does not reflect the fact that we are currently only part of the way through the contracting arrangements with our partners. So our partners have bid for and been allocated, in many cases, quite sizable amounts of affordable housing grant. All of those then have to get locked down in legal contracts.
Sure.
Until those legal contracts are in place, we can't actually book their starts. So it's a kind of system point.
Cool, of course.
So I, at this point, am confident that we will hit our starts trajectory this year. You're absolutely right, though, that it is a back-ended programme. I think that was always inevitable because we were starting a new programme from a very low base. It will mean that certainly in the 2021 year, we will need to see housing starts, affordable housing starts, at a level that we really haven't been familiar with in this city for a very long time. But you know, we're working hard at that. We're confident that we can deliver. We've got a long track record of delivering our targets on time and on budget. So at this stage, I've got no reason to think that we won't secure that.
So that 570 figure, that is a 5-month figure.
Yeah.
I would think. And in your, so that's the 500 off the 12,000. So you're saying that between now and May, what is fiscal? April, May? End of March?
March 31.
March 31. So that's a 6-month figure then.
Yeah.
You're saying that we're going to get another 12,000 starts, are you?
Yeah, roughly. Yeah.
Very good. So, but that, of course, that is at the lower end of the target rather than the higher end of the target, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we will obviously aim to do better than that. But the reason why we've got these ranges is because it is very difficult with such a large programme building from a very, very low base.
Sure.
To be clear year on year. But obviously the more we can do early on, the more relaxed we can be about the subsequent years.
Sorry, I was just sidetracked by a certain trajectory. So you're confident then that we will deliver the 90,000 by 21?
Yes.
The reason I ask that is because if we look at the very hard to read sheet on the page number 71, and we look at the affordable housing programme, whilst your trajectory ends in 2021, a lot of that money is being spent in 21-22. I've got it down as 15879.
Yeah.
So you're paying people after they start?
Yeah, because the completions will obviously extend, because obviously we're measuring starts, the completions will tail beyond 2021, and we normally pay...
They get their money on completion?
We pay it in tranches, yeah. So we'll pay a tranche on start and a tranche on completion.
Oh, right, so like 50 up front, something like
Yeah.
that. Oh, okay, that's just wondered why the profiling was different. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So can I then quickly take you on to the fast track you mentioned, which you said seems to be having some positive results, which is interesting because in both of my boroughs actually, The biggest complaint I'm getting from developers is that, especially in one borough, and I won't mention which one it is, there's a belligerence around this 35%, which means that we've had thousands of homes that have not started because they cannot negotiate a deal with the authority, although they're doing the three dragons approach, and it's quite clear, both from what the borough's done and the developer's done, that 35% is completely unachievable. There's still this belligerence, and that means that we have thousands and thousands of homes not starting in those boroughs because of this. Do you think that there's some way there can be some flexibility, or do you think that this is the right way forward?
Well, I think there has been some misunderstanding in some quarters about the 35% threshold point. It's important to remember that the need for viability assessments as part of the planning process to interrogate and determine the levels of affordable housing that are due isn't just something that exists in London and the GLA. It's a national government policy to require viability assessments. The reason why the Mayor's introduced the 35% threshold is very much to avoid the need for those viability assessments where applicants are able to make that step. So it's a way to incentivise more affordable housing by effectively giving them that fast-track mechanism. So I think that's the first thing to say. I think the second thing to say is that the Mayor is not saying, and current planning policy is not saying, that applications that fail to achieve 35% affordable housing will be refused, but clearly there is going to need to be a rigorous and transparent viability approach to determine that no more affordable housing is genuinely achievable. And I guess that is what may be slowing down some of these applications that you're mentioning. I don't know the details.
Well, I wouldn't discuss the details here anyway.
No, of course not.
So just finally, could I just say, so you may hit your 12,500 affordable home starts for this period. The Mayor has said we need 66,000 new homes each year. He's promised 50,000 new homes each year. What figure this year will we hit in relation to new homes?
In overall terms?
Yeah.
Very difficult for me to say at this stage. It's very difficult to know. I mean, I can give you...
Where are we now after 5 months?
I can give you more precision on the affordable housing position, as we've discussed, because we have some real influence and, to some extent, some control over that.
Sure.
But we don't on the wider market position.
Do we not know, we're 6 months in, do we not know how many new homes are starting then?
We could pull out from the planning system a figure that will give you how many just general homes have been provided. I can supply that after the meeting. It's not a figure that we look at more than quarterly.
You're right.
Okay.
Chairman, would you like that?
Yeah, we'll get that circulated.
Yeah. Brilliant. That's very helpful. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, Assembly Member Cooper.
Thank you, Chair. I want to come back to the issue of completions, because starts on site are all very well, but
members.
Most Londoners can't live in building sites, so I want to know much more about completions, and what are the numbers. Can you give us any idea of what the completion numbers are going to be? And you've talked about the complexity of the process and how long a number of aspects take. But obviously we've had the report on off-site construction, which reduces the construction phase down quite dramatically, and we've had the cross-party letter signed by Nicky Gavron as the chair of the Assembly's Planning Committee and others asking for an extra 300 million for off-site construction. Do you support that letter? How many of the completions might be brought forward by using these methods?
Well, we certainly do support efforts to move more housing production in London into off-site and precision manufactured techniques. We've spent quite a lot of time with partners exploring opportunities to do that, encouraging them to work together, to collaborate. We've spent quite a lot of time with the G15 associations exploring whether they can partner, because obviously one of the things that factory manufacture needs is it needs long-term certainty and scale. Some of those discussions have borne fruit, and we've now seen a number of providers move more of their programs into off-site production. And one in particular has constructed an off-site manufacture factory just to the east of London. We are also very keen, as part of our dialogue with government around resources, to gain more access to their accelerated construction fund. And we are also, I think I mentioned that we have an innovation fund, which is there specifically to take bids for innovation. And one of the key themes in that is precision manufacture. So we're extremely keen to see more of this. I think you're absolutely right. It can compress the production time. It can also address, the potentially very, very serious crisis we've got in terms of mainstream construction labour and the shortage of that. And we also think that, despite some of the prejudices against off-site manufacture, we think that it can seriously address housing quality issues. So I think we're completely with you in that. It's very difficult for me to be drawn on where we will be on completions towards the back end of this programme. I'd love to be more precise, but it is very difficult until we get more clarity about the profile of starts, because, as you will appreciate, completions typically run 12, 18 months ahead of starts. And if we can bring more starts forward, then we'll obviously have a stronger position on affordable housing completions by 2021. At this stage, it's very, very difficult for me to be drawn on that.
So what sort of percentage of the programme currently, bearing in mind you've got the innovation and you've been exploring these things with the G15, what kind of percentage of the current programme might be going down the off-site precision construction route? And I completely agree with you, it is very different from the traditional view of a prefab after the war that was constructed for 5 minutes, ended up being there for 60 years. These are very high quality, very environmentally sound properties that will hopefully last, and they're being built with the intention to last. I've visited several. But what percentage of the current programme might be going down that route and therefore completed more quickly?
Again, I don't have any exact figures on that, but I would suggest that it's very small at the moment. There are some providers that are committed to rolling this out at scale in their own programs. So Swan Housing Association, for instance, who have procured their own factory in Thurrock, are looking to move most of their production, as I understand it, into off-site manufacture. Most of the others are not as far advanced on that journey. I don't know what the figures are, but they will be very small. I would guess less than 10% at the moment would be my hunch.
And so, therefore, do you support the letter that's come from all the parties on the Assembly that's gone to the Chancellor asking for additional money? And what more can you do to persuade G15 and others to increase that percentage? Because I think this is the way to get earlier completions, and that's what Londoners need.
Yeah. Well, as I say, I mean, it is a very regular dialogue and discussion that we have with the G15 and others. We have got incentive programmes specifically allocated for innovation in construction. I think that market conditions are encouraging our partners to move down this road anyway, because obviously the costs of construction and the risks around construction labour going forward are well known. I think there is some maybe understandable trepidation on the part of some that investing a great deal into systems that in some cases are still quite new and they might claim are still untested may have some element of risk to it, and that is that's a fairly common piece of feedback that we get. But I would be surprised if over the next 2 to 3 years of our programme we don't see more move into precision manufacture. I'd be surprised if by the end of this period precision manufacture isn't closer to the norm rather than a very small minority of production.
Well, we don't seem very keen on KPIs, but I'd certainly like to see some KPIs for an increase in that area. Thank you, Chair.
Nice finish. Assemblymember Pigeon.
So I'm just picking up on that. Are you working with TfL around this? Because some of the new Crossrail stations have actually been manufactured off-site and bought in. So actually, it may not just be a risk for the housing sector. You could be working across different parts of the GLA to make sure that we have the factories in place to be able to build this precision housing and other things such as stations. Are you having those discussions?
Yes, we are, and colleagues at TfL, I know, are quite advanced in some discussions with an off-site manufacturing outfit that's looking to bring a relatively new product at scale to London that TfL are giving active consideration to using on some of their surplus and also some of their current operational sites. I don't think any formal decisions have been made yet, but they're certainly keen to explore that in a positive way.
Okay, thank you. The question I wanted to ask you is you made a statement earlier about for the first time ever, you've now got this estates board for London. It was in the health devolution package. It was, this is, a huge thing. But I recall we had this before under Boris Johnson. I recall many announcements about how all the public land was coming together, you were mapping it, you were working together. How is this different to what we've had before, and how is it going to deliver more affordable housing?
Well, under the previous mayor, we had an arrangement known as the London Land Commission, which was jointly chaired by the mayor and the housing minister. And the job of the Land Commission really was to do two things. One was to comprehensively map public land and assets in London, which we undertook to do here at City Hall, and we produced that digitised map. The second thing it was designed to do was to look at some of the barriers and obstacles to bringing public land forward with a view to dealing with those obstacles and overcoming them. I think we were successful at the first. I think, frankly, the Commission was less successful at the second because although we surfaced some of the issues around, for instance, the difficulties of getting health service land released at scale, we didn't actually make very much progress at all in terms of a response from government to deal with that. So I think the Health Estates Board is a different proposal altogether. First of all, it is entirely focused on the health estate. So it's not attempting to deal with, Network Rail or MOD or the others. So it's a much more focused operation. Secondly, I think it can build on what is good practice in some parts of the London Health Service, where there have been some quite creative approaches to looking at modernising the estate, rationalising the estate, releasing land. And thirdly, it will have its own delivery team. So it'll have a team of 5 or 6 professionals. They will be located within my team at Union Street. So we'll actually have not only the key decision makers around the table, but also a dedicated delivery team that will be working with the trusts and the CCGs to really interrogate what is possible and come forward with early recommendations. So I think this is a much more structured and focused approach, frankly, than we had with the old Commission.
Okay, so this is just health, which I hadn't appreciated when you first stated it. I knew it was part of this devolution package, but it's complex health in London, and you say there's so many parties involved, CCGs and the like. Are you going to, after your initial meetings, set up a programme and again have clear targets? These are the sites we're looking to sell, this is the number of affordable homes, which again we can hold you to account for?
I would hope so. I would hope that would be an early part of the new team's work. We will be looking to get that up and running early in the new year. As I say, I think there are some examples of good practice to draw on, and we have, and indeed are having, a number of conversations and even negotiations with trusts that are looking to release land in London. So I think, we can to some extent hit the ground running on this, but clearly, unlike perhaps the Land Commission, we'll want to see a series of staging posts and targets and outcomes from this work rather than just, a year or two of talking shop. We need to see results.
Okay, so when do you think we'll be able to have those targets? Because we will want to measure you on those.
Difficult to say, but I would have hoped we will be in a position by the middle of next year to be clear about what we think we can expect from the new team.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, members. We're going to move back now to Assembly Member Berry.
Yes, absolutely. Can I just ask one more question on the London Estates Board, seeing as we've gone into more detail on that?
By all means.
I've been asking some written questions about that, and I think it is a really positive development and could be more widely used outside of NHS land. One of the things that was said was as soon as you've got the devolution agreement, you'd start to put forward more details of things like involving the local community in sub-regional groups and things like that. Will it, I mean, we just asked about targets. Will we see something like a business plan and plans to start engaging on actual sites and talk to the local community quite soon now that you've got the agreement hammered out of it?
Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes. I mean, I don't think we want to spend, too long kind of agonising about plans and strategies without actually getting on and finding some early wins. And as I say, I mean, we're in, I think, quite constructive dialogue with a number of health trusts in London. And I would hope early in the new year that we might be able to bring forward some quite interesting opportunities that might also involve very directly opportunities for the local community to get involved in outcomes in those places.
Okay, that's really encouraging to hear. I mean, every answer I've had back so far says you're in an advisory phase, but I think we need an action phase now, basically. Yeah, great, thank you. I wanted to ask about housing zones. It's the next set of questions, because the last time we looked at this, our pre-budget report last year highlighted that the housing zones were somewhat behind. I think the housing strategy admits that. It says it's going to put some more revenue funding again into helping speed it up. But also, it does seem to be slightly more on track than it was. Can you update us and tell us if it is back on track?
Yes. As I think you know, we've spent quite a lot of time kind of doing a systematic review of the housing zones, and I think that's been useful. It's led to an increase in affordable housing delivery through the zones programme. It's also, I think, helped us to shake out, if you like, those that are on track and performing well from those that for various reasons have maybe struggled to keep up to programme. It's worth pointing out, of course, that we always thought that there were going to be some stragglers in the programme. These are complicated projects, and that's why we over-programmed it quite extensively, because we expected to see some slippage. So the position at the moment is that we have said to the housing zone boroughs, all 30 of them, that if you're not in contract with us by the end of January 18, then we would withdraw the funding from the current housing zones programme. That doesn't mean that we won't fund those boroughs' housing zones. It means that we will effectively decide whether or not to fund them through new business rather than the existing budget that we have. However, of the budget that we've got for housing zones, the £200 million that's allocated for housing zones loans as opposed to grant, this is recoverable money, of that 200 million, that's all contracted, or it will be this calendar year. So I think we're in a very strong position on the loan funding for housing zones. On the grant funding, we've got a £400 million budget in housing zones, and we're currently contracted at 166 million. So I think with the new pressure that we're exerting to get boroughs into contract by the end of January, I would anticipate that we will be pretty much on track. And in terms of the revenue funding that you've mentioned, the 600,000, which we've allocated because there was a very strong plea from boroughs that they also needed some help with revenue to support their schemes. We've not allocated all of that yet, but I'm pretty confident that we will do. And we've got 11 boroughs at the moment that we've agreed will receive a share of that. So I think the programme's in much better shape. As I say, I think some might drop out of the current funding timetable, but we'll be picking up with them to see whether we can allocate more funding for those zones through new business rather than the existing budget.
Okay, I mean, certainly looking at the grants line in the projected budget here, it jumps up and down a little bit, but it's certainly not completely backloaded in the way that you might expect if things were really going very slowly.
Yeah.
Will there be any conditions on the council to get the £600,000 revenue funding, or is that, have you already decided who's going to get that?
Yeah, I mean, these are all, I mean, we agree the terms for these things within their contracts, but effectively it's costs for, in some cases, additional project staff, in some cases it's professional technical fees, consultant support and so forth. But we're pretty flexible, so long as there's some sort of evidence that it's going to lead to results, we'll be pretty flexible in our funding.
Okay, there's a few bits and pieces in the housing strategy to do with the housing zones I just wanted to get some clarity on, and some of the things that are in the budget too. You've said in the housing strategy that you want to sort of focus on the strongest housing zones. So can I ask how you determine what the strongest ones are, and does that mean that money will be taken away from the weaker ones other than what you just said? Will there be any moving around of grants and loans there?
Yeah, I mean, well, the strongest housing zones are generally those that, you know, have got evidence that they've got a grip on their programmes, that, you know, delivery is either underway or, you know, is credibly going to be underway within the timeframes that we've negotiated with them. The weaker ones, or the stragglers, are those that, you know, are not in that category, frankly, sometimes for good reasons. And in terms of taking money away, yes, as I explained, we will be deallocating the funding that was associated with those boroughs. That was always going to have to be the plan because of the level of over-programming. But that does not mean that we are de-designating them as housing zones. It means that we will be looking to engage with them on a new business basis to see whether we can fund them that way.
Okay. I've been trying to get more information about the progress of housing zones since I got elected. Last year I was told wait for the autumn because there'll be a new brochure coming out, and then it didn't, and then that. So I haven't actually been able to get a decent set of numbers to show not only the budget going into each housing zone and how that's being spent, but also the homes built, the number of affordable homes, different tenures, the numbers demolished. I've been asking all those questions. Will we now be able to get that? You said you've done a thorough review. Are you going to publish the brochure or the equivalent of that?
Yeah, I'm not sure we're doing a brochure as such, but I'm very happy to share the outcome of the Housing Zones review. So we can certainly follow that up and give you whatever information. And
that includes sort of definite numbers on housing, you know, demolitions and then delivery and all of those?
Yes.
The amounts replaced. That's really useful because I literally haven't been able to get that so far. The other thing that's in the housing strategy is you're saying that you are going to make, the Mayor is going to make the case to government to recycle £150 million of government loan funding for housing zones to deliver more homes in London. Yeah. Can you please explain that all a little bit to us? Because there is a bit of a complication in that quite a lot of the housing zone money is loans that come via you from government to councils that come back. You're saying are you saying that you want to spend the money you would have given on loans on something else? Or are you saying instead of giving it back to London to the government once it's coming to you, you want to spend it on something else? And what is that?
Yeah, when we first launched the Housing Zones programme, initially we had a £200 million GLA budget that we allocated to it, and the government were so enthusiastic about the idea that they said they wanted to match fund, but instead of giving us grant, they would only give us loan funding. So that £200 million that I mentioned a few minutes ago that is now pretty much all allocated, that £200 million will have to go back to the government once it's repaid by the contracting parties. Our case to government is that because that's been so successful, would they be willing to allow us to recycle it again? Ultimately, the money may go back to government, but if we could recycle it and use it more than once, we would obviously get more outcome as a consequence. So that's really what we're asking for. We're not necessarily saying the money should stay ultimately with the GLA. that would be nice. But if we can recycle it more than once, that would be much more efficient.
And you'd be recycling it you'd be making the case to recycle it in exactly the same way, i.e. loan it out again for more housing zones, not put it into other affordable housing programmes?
Well, I think either within the existing housing zones programme or to do similar work elsewhere in London where we may have a case for, bringing sites forward or other works that are necessary to get affordable housing built. So I'm not sure at this stage whether we'll be designating more housing zones, but I think the kind of approach that we've taken in housing zones is increasingly going to become the core business for us because, as you know, a lot of the challenge around delivering affordable housing is things like helping with site assembly, local infrastructure, remediation and so forth. And that's really where this kind of loan funding could be quite helpful.
And when does this become an issue? When are you going to have the money to recycle, as it were? When are the loans coming back?
The existing loans, they have a variety of different recovery periods. I think I can't remember off the top of my head, but some of these loans were, the long stop date for the loan recovery that was agreed with government was quite distant in some cases. I think it was 10 years or more. Some of them are much shorter term, so it varies.
Okay, when will we expect to hear back that whether or not you've been successful in negotiating this £150 million recycling scheme, as it were?
Well, it's difficult to say. Okay. I mean, we've been making the case for some time. As soon as the government makes its mind up, I think is the answer.
Okay, thank you. It's the answer we got to all the Brexit questions as well. Thank you. That's all my questions.
It's not just the government that needs to make up its mind about Brexit. Assembly Member Prince.
Thank you. Can I move to the London Housing Bank? Having heard what you said, I may be getting a bit confused. According to the notes here, the London Housing Bank is funded through a £200 million loan from the DCLG. Is that the same 200 million you were just talking about?
No, it's just coincidental that it's the same figure.
Right. First of all, just technically, I can see the spending profile in the infamous page 71. Luckily, I'm very short-sighted, so I can read it quite easily. The question is, just for my own edification, I can't see where the financing is coming from. I can see the spending profile, but I can't see the financing profile. Or was it a one-off lump off the books?
It's money that we draw from government as we strike deals.
Right.
So if we strike a deal, we will draw that money down, I think.
But would that still not need to be shown in the financing section? Somewhere.
Can you help me on that?
I think it's included.
You've hidden it somewhere, haven't you, Mark?
I think it's included in the affordable housing line. Financing
in the where?
Affordable housing line. I think it's in there.
Yeah, I thought it might be.
We can confirm that, actually.
Would it not be more helpful to break it out, though?
Agreed.
Yeah, Agreed. Thank you. Good. That's a technical bit out of the way. Now, according to according to something you told us in 2016, you said you were going to approach the DCLG and ask them, because there was an underspend of £31 million, whether they would transfer that to the housing zone project. Did you have any success with that?
No. No.
No, right.
Short answer.
That's short answer. And you said it's a drawdown loan, so we don't pay for money that we've got in a bank somewhere that we're not using then.
No. I mean, it's worth saying. I mean, I don't know whether it's worth kind of putting a bit of context to this, because the London Housing Bank was a 200 million loan allocation. It was agreed in 2013, I think. And it was for a very specific purpose. It was a 7-year loan period for initiatives that involved intermediate or submarket rent which by the end of the 7-year loan period would be refinanced or effectively sold. So it was quite an innovative experimental idea. And I think back in 2012, 2013, it was the case that access to finance for housing associations and registered partners was slightly different than it is today. It was probably a less benign funding environment. So we thought it was worth giving it a go. It has been a slow programme, no question about that. So far we've only contracted one deal, which was worth about 21 million. There's another one which we're hoping to contract, but because of the changing market conditions and the difficulties we've had getting appetite from partners for the London Housing Bank, we have asked government, we have asked DCLG to allow us to repurpose that funding and actually extend it to a wider range of products, because we think that that would be more appropriate in the new environment. But so far, as I've indicated, we've not had a positive response. We've not had a negative response, we've just not had a response.
Right. Interesting, that's very helpful. I think we've touched on this, just where we are on the land fund.
Yeah.
Could you just update us there?
Okay, so so as you know, the Mayor has announced the land fund, and the land fund will effectively operate with resources that will be drawn from GLA's land receipts. So the GLA land bank, which over a period of time is generating quite substantial land receipts. And the Mayor was keen to use that and get that money working on a recycling basis to try and help to get more affordable housing delivered. So that's where the £250 million land fund comes from. We are in the process of finalising an MD that will set out the operational arrangements and the governance for the land fund. We see some potential here to create quite an interesting investment fund model for the GLA, drawing on some of the experience that we've had over the last few years of assembling land and bringing it to market. So I would hope that certainly early in the new year we'll get this thing up and running, and we are already having a number of discussions around potential land transactions that could be funded from that, because once we get the operational arrangements up and running, we're obviously keen to get things moving quickly.
So when do we think that will be in place?
I would hope early in the new year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Assemblyman Prince. We're going to move back now to talk about environment and growth deal funding. Mr. Lunts, I understand you need to leave, so
thank you very much for agreeing to shift the agenda around.
That's no problem at all. I'd like to thank Fiona Fletcher-Smith for waiting so patiently and agreeing to have her section moved as well. So this section is going to be led off by Assemblymember Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. Obviously very close to my heart as the Chair of the Environment Committee. My first question is, how does the draft budget support the environment strategy? Consultation has literally just closed. Quite hard to see how it does, because there seem to be some amounts that have been reduced. So it would be very helpful if you could explain how.
Sure, I think that is the first point. The consultation has just closed. We've had, I think, around 5,000 responses, which is fabulous. But we have to analyse those and see what they mean for the propositions we put forward in the strategy. The other thing to say about the environment strategy, it isn't simply about us delivering. It's also a call to action for others, and it's also about setting some policy frameworks to make that happen. So, for example, the environment team historically has been fabulous at getting other people's money in to deliver on a lot of these targets. And although the European funding pipeline may be cut from us in some way in the near future, if we look at, say...
It seems quite likely that that will happen.
Yes, but we do hear noises that there may be some replacement funding, which we wait to hear on. I think I'm in the same position as Mr. Lunts in terms of waiting for some government guidance on this. But if we take the example of the London Energy Efficiency Fund, just to give you a breakdown of how the environment team managed to pull together this fund, It was 43 million from ERDF, 100 million from the EIB, but very importantly, it brought in 260 million of private sector resource. And then if we look at air quality as a key plank of what we want to do in the strategy and generally, a lot of the air quality work for London is actually paid for and carried out by Transport for London. So again, a considerable amount of that is baked into, or will be baked into, TfL's plans for the coming years.
So you're saying that despite the headline decreases that we can see in the figures, that this is not going to undermine delivery of the ambitious environment strategy?
No, absolutely not. And you'll also see from the papers that this is an area where there will be growth of about 800,000, which, as you see in the papers, is unusual in terms of what we're doing. And the team also had a considerable amount of growth in the previous year, which has allowed us to reconfigure staffing and really put the resource into what we want to do in the environment strategy. Also, the team are in the process of putting together what I describe really as a business plan, which will match what the LES is saying we want to do, make sure we've got the right internal resources to do that, and to keep this work going on bringing others to the table in terms of in-kind delivery or in terms of actual real cash.
Okay, so looking specifically at the capital budget, which has been removing money from the capital budget, you will still be able to pursue the domestic retrofit agenda that is obviously so key to delivering on the fuel poverty action plan, which accompanies the environment strategy.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think what these papers don't show is with the current capital programme, we're looking at reprofiling that will pull this money into future years, and I'm afraid we haven't completed that piece of work yet, which is why the 1.1 million just sits in 17-18. Also, there's a considerable amount of revenue associated with the retrofit programme, which is also about revenue support to local authorities in terms of the work they do. And that revenue amounts to almost 1 million per year. It's about 900,000. And we will be, as I say, working very closely with local authorities to target our work more effectively than we've been able to do in the past. We've also just commissioned an evaluation of the Better Boilers scheme, which was a previous iteration of domestic retrofit. That instinctively we knew there were serious problems with, but this evaluation will be able to make sure that the next spending round for this programme doesn't make the same mistakes and targets it at the Londoners who really, really need the help. And, as you say, not only reduces carbon, but also works on fuel poverty at the same time.
Well, yes, targeting is incredibly important, and there's been some very good research done outside of London looking into exactly how that can be, those programmes can be delivered most effectively to the people that need it most. So I hope we'll be looking at that evidence beyond London. National Energy Action, for example, have got a lot of that detail. Just coming then to the scaling back up and out from the individual fuel poverty situation back up to carbon reduction targets. And this is something that we spoke about at the Environment Committee with Shirley Rodriguez and her team who were there. And one of our concerns has been that the carbon reduction targets to 2025 have been reduced. Now, you know, in terms of the planet and in terms of addressing, you know, the need to play our part in addressing issues around global warming, that does seem very difficult. And you're then sort of backloading the need to do a lot more carbon reduction at a later date, which probably isn't very helpful anyway, given the most recent announcements about, you know, increased temperature globally. Can we really not bring that forward? Do we not need to put in some extra resources at an earlier stage for earlier carbon reduction?
The Deputy Mayor took away your challenge at that meeting and has given that back to us as a team to figure out how we can do that. But it will be a case of looking for other resources beyond the GLA and how we, you know, back to my earlier point, how we garner all of that to do it. But she has set that challenge down to the team in light of your comments at the committee recently.
And I think also in light of the most recent evidence of the actual 2% increase, which is really bad news, because we're right next to the river, and it's not great for Londoners. You know, we can spend a lot of time then doing mitigation and adaptation, which then requires even more expense. Well, that's really good to hear. We look forward to hearing from the Deputy Mayor on that one. Just turning now, we were talking about air quality, talking about expenditure through TfL on air quality. Obviously, the T-charge launched, toxicity charge, emission surcharge, whatever you want to call it, on the 23rd of October. Now, I'm not seeing that as a you know, we launched it because we want the revenue from it, and it obviously applies to all vehicles, although some people have misunderstood and think it only applies to one sort of vehicle. How much revenue, however, will be coming in from the T-charge? Who will retain it, and what are we planning to do with it?
I think you're absolutely right. The T-charge is not at all about revenue generation. It is about London's air quality and about the health of Londoners. Initially, there will be no income. This will actually cost us money to set up and implement. However, if at any stage there is an income stream from it, it will be ring-fenced to air quality initiatives and will be spent. It will be in the same way that local authorities have to spend their parking income on road issues. TfL will only spend this on air quality initiatives, including, I have to say, on their own fleet, where there's considerable expenditure needed.
Okay, so effectively any money that is income from T-charge is going to be hypothecated directly to working on air quality. That's, I think, will be very welcome to Londoners. Finally, just on environmental issues, plastic bottles. We did a whole meeting on this last February at the Environment Committee, and heard a lot of detailed evidence about the impact on fish in the River Thames. 75% of the flounder have got plastic in their stomachs. 90% of seabirds have got plastic in them. I think most people have now seen the horrible pictures in Blue Planet of an albatross feeding plastic, you know, to its young. It's clearly it was a fantastic invention, light, durable, very, very multi-use. We're very bad in London at using it just once and then not doing very much with it. Really good to see that you're talking about having an increase in the budget for this, and that it was in the environment strategy. What exactly are we going to spend this money on?
What exactly is a difficult question to answer at the moment, because we're in the process of scoping it, but what I can assure you is this is a huge priority for the Mayor. So the single-use plastic, whether it's plastic cup or plastic bottle, very determined to come up with some solutions, whether that be deposit return schemes or drinking fountains. But that 300k that we are hoping to get in next year's budget, we will be scoping the work between now and the end of the financial year. And obviously we'll want to discuss that again with the Environment Committee and take some soundings on the ideas as they come up.
That's fantastic. So that's not actually then nailed down as to whether that would be money that would be capital or revenue, the 300k? Is that clear at this point?
It's most likely to be revenue that we will need initially. Again, because the way the environment team work and try and get their hands on other people's money and get other people to do things where there are capital implications, say something we can bake into public realm schemes, planning schemes to make sure that others are delivering this as part of their new developments, for example, or parts of refurbishments and improvements. So, as I say, I keep saying the environment team are exceptionally good at getting their hands on other people's money.
Okay. Am I passing over at this point too? Or am I continuing with just the end? I'm ploughing on then. The other one is the growth deal. How are you planning to use the growth deal funding that was announced in last year's budget?
Well, to link your previous questions on environment and some answers on the growth deal 3, which amounts to about £141 million for this current round. £11 million of that will be used on air quality, which is a top priority for us, and will target the commercial sector. So where we have a lot of retrofit on individual homes, we're also very concerned about the emissions from commercial buildings and their heating and ventilation systems. So to break it down, 56 million of the 141 is for Skills for Londoners Capital, which used to be called the Further Education Capital Budget. About 70 million, just short of 70 million, will be for the Good Growth Fund, which I'll say a little bit more in a second. And then linking back to Mr. Lunts's points, there's about 13.4 million of the Growth Fund we will use for unlocking small sites. Because if we need to hit a housing target of 65,000 units a year, small sites will be very important to us, and we want to put some money into that. So in June this year, we launched a prospectus on the Good Growth Fund, and that is building on previous work we've done, particularly around crowdsourcing, both ideas and crowdfunding, using Space Hive. And we've got 3 priorities in that programme. One is about empowering people, because what we found from the crowdsourcing of ideas was it really led to a huge increase in citizen engagement in areas and places. I think we've used the example of the Peckham coal line probably more times than we should, but in terms of local engagement, it was absolutely fabulous. And then second priority would be making better places. So again, linking back to the housing numbers, if we need to substantially increase the amount of housing we're building in London, we need to make sure that density and that volume doesn't drive out good placemaking. So again, we want to have that as a priority. And then finally, prosperity and growing London's prosperity and prosperity for all. We have talked a lot, and rightfully so, about the housing crisis, but we also have a crisis of commercial space in London as well, and particularly affordable commercial space. So we want to target the fund at off high street sort of schemes and industrial areas to try and get some innovative thinking going there.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on and talk a little bit about London and Partners, and that's going to be Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. London and Partners committed to producing a full business plan, and my question is to you, Ms. Fletcher-Smith. Full business plan and a 3-year strategy plan to inform the 2018-19 budget process. We don't have these documents in front of us today. Do you think this is a satisfactory situation? And when are we going to see these documents? And in the absence of a business plan in particular, how can we robustly scrutinize proposals for funding for London Partners? In fact, we're seeking to give them more money.
Generally, I received their business plan in early January, and we carry out some officer-level scrutiny of it then. And then the intention is to absolutely share it with you in January, and that will inform the budget. But I think some background information is important on this, and it's set out in the budget paper. One of the issues for us has been that we have been trying to drive efficiencies out of London and Partners, and we have been very successful working with them to increase their private sector income. But given Brexit, and there are some statistics in the budget paper, given the importance of maintaining London's competitiveness while there's this uncertainty about what the future will be, we feel that keeping their funding at the 11.9 million is essential, but also recognising they have more work to do than they've ever had in the past. We will actually be proposing to increase their funding as part of their business plan this year. And that's in recognition of the fact that there's a 35% drop in FDI to London if you compare the 6 months, beginning 6 months of 2016 with the beginning 6 months of 2017. L&P themselves are reporting an 18% drop in leads, and also they need to spend more time and energy maintaining the businesses that are in London. About 40 to 44% of them are thinking about their future, and that could involve relocation. So it's about having a proper account management system within London and Partners that they haven't been able to do very effectively so far, so that we can maintain the businesses that are here and also reach out to those key decision makers around the world and influence their decisions.
Yes, I mean, I get that, but clearly the absence of these documents, I mean, we don't have anything to.
No, but once I have it, I'm happy to share it.
Well, when do you expect to have it?
I generally don't get it until January, so every year I get it in January.
Could I potentially just intervene
yes,
briefly on this? Apologies to you.
Yeah.
When we had London and Partners in front of the Assembly for a plenary meeting, we challenged them to prove a line of cause and effect between their activities and foreign direct investment in London. You've just referenced the 6 months pre-referendum and 6 months post, and that's a statistic that does need to be looked into. It's very difficult for us as Assembly members who obviously have to approve the Mayor's budget to feel comfortable with that without London and Partners being able to prove that what we spend on them is actually generating a return. In the absence of a business plan, that becomes even more so. So I'd like your reaction to that and thoughts about how we move forward.
No, I absolutely agree. It can sometimes seem like a black art being able to draw that line between the 11.9 million we put in and then foreign direct investment decisions coming into London. And the business plan is exactly where we scrutinise that. But it is a question of timing. It generally comes to us in early January. And I'm absolutely happy to sit down with Assembly members and scrutinise that together in terms of how we make that link and how we prove that putting extra money into London and Partners is going to make a difference.
So you're expecting the business plan in January? In
January.
So before we make the final decision on the Mayor's final budget, you will have that?
Absolutely.
And the Assembly will have that too?
Yeah. And that informs our own budget setting process, that we carry out this scrutiny of London and Partners plan at the beginning of each year. I mean, I have over the years pushed to have it earlier. It would be ideal if we had it before now and ideal if we had it in the autumn. But particularly given Brexit and their concerns about that and their need to gather market information and data to inform the budget growth, I think a little bit of leeway in allowing them to January this time it seems reasonable to me.
Sorry.
Yeah, so the business plan in January 2018 and the 3-year strategy was going to be drafted by July 2017 and would then go through a mayoral decision soon after. What's the progress with that?
Well, we're making progress on that, but it will get wrapped up into the annual business plan and the budget setting discussion. The main outcome of it is this analysis of what Brexit could do to London and what we're seeing from the data so far. And that's what's informing our suggestion that we need to put extra resource into LNP.
I've seen the core draft submissions and you seek to allocate 13.6 million to London Partners. And you talk in very general terms about Brexit and so on. But can you sort of be more specific as to how this additional funding is going to be used? And how can you convince us that this is an effective use of money?
So two things that are important with London Partners. The first thing to recognise is that when CEOs of businesses make investment decisions, whether that's to stay where they are or to move somewhere else, they will use a set of metrics around cost, affordability, access to skills and labour. But some recent research by an American company called Hickey, who specialise in commercial relocation, is actually suggesting that there is generally somebody in the organisation, sometimes the CEO, but sometimes, say, the head of global property, who will make the decision about where they go. So two things flow from that. Firstly, if we're seeing 40 to 44% of businesses, international business in London and investors thinking about whether they move or not, we first of all have to have a mechanism for influencing them. So that is about this account management approach to businesses in London who are thinking of moving. And then secondly, there are businesses around the world who still see, and for very good reasons, will see London as a good place to be. Because Brexit aside, the fundamentals of London remain the same in terms of our financial system, our legal system, our language, our time zone. And London is, frankly, a fantastic place to be in terms of culture and attractiveness. And it's how do we influence those investors on their home turf when they're thinking about whether they go to Dublin, Frankfurt, or stick with London. So those are the two areas that we'll want to
additional funding
on. Yes.
Right. And can I ask you this? Do you think that London Partners are the best body to carry out this work? Could it not be done by the GLA itself?
Well, London Partners are the Mayor's inward investment agency. So they are the body that we have set up to do this work for us.
Right. Okay, well, it's debatable. And are you happy that London partners have sought the necessary efficiency savings?
Yes, within their overall envelope, we have been pushing them very hard for a number of years, really, since they were established. And we're fairly confident now that they're a pretty lean machine. So although we'll be giving them extra money, they are also looking at their whole business to make sure it's focused on these issues of maintaining London's competitiveness, making sure businesses don't leave, and also attracting new business in.
Chair, just in a second, I met someone from London Partners a good few months ago, and I asked about the marketing strategy, and I was not very convinced by what he said. I mean, could we have much more information about how you market yourself and so on?
Sure, I'm happy to ask
more
LNP
of data strategy, particularly with Brexit developments.
I'm absolutely happy to get them to provide the marketing strategy. Yeah.
We'll write to you formally after the meeting and request that. Yeah. Okay, we're going to move on again and look at the two MDCs now, and Assembly Member Pigeon's leading off for us on that.
Lovely, thank you very much. I'm going to start off looking at the Old Oakham Park Royal Development Corporation. Looking at they've obviously been spending the last year developing the master plan for the site, and once that's agreed, you expect to start construction development. So what work will the OPDC do in the next year, and therefore what funding does it actually require to support the master plan?
Well, there are two main pieces of work. It's obviously the master plan and the outcome of that, and what that means in terms of implementation. So it could mean land assembly, for example. Mm-hmm. And then the second part of that is around the infrastructure that's needed and how they pull together a funding package for that, and how they bed that into planning policies and planning decisions. And then underpinning it all is the ongoing conversation with Department for Transport about land transfer and what assets could come to the GLA or to the Development Corporation. And that's a conversation that's being carried on over the last year that we don't have a definitive answer to. So those are sort of two main pieces of work with this underlying land issue.
72% of the brownfield land is owned by the government. Yeah. You're basically saying, even though there was a memorandum of understanding from March 2016, you've still not got any progress in terms of how you will have the land transferred at an affordable price, as it were, or at no price, I don't know what the deal would be, that actually means that you can build the homes that are needed. Is that correct?
To be fair to the Department of Transport, and I'm not always fair to the Department of Transport, we seriously started engaging with them in about April, May on this issue. If you remember, Network Rail were going through some changes where they were being effectively brought back under the control of DfT. So there were a lot of moving parts. We were appointing our new chair for Old Oak in Liz Peace. And also we wanted to be sure internally within OPDC that taking the land was the right thing to do, because with railway land comes a lot of responsibilities. This is land that's been railway land for 150 years, so remediation will be an issue. And we just wanted to assure ourselves that this was the right thing to do. And then on the other side of the equation with government, they're obviously looking at their own vehicles for regeneration and whether they're more interested in joint venture arrangements, for example, on overstation development. So both sides of the MOU we were having some thoughts really about what we want to do going forward. But it's now clear, and our approach has been welcomed from DfT to reopen the negotiations about particularly the nature of the value of the land, whether it's development value or existing use. And obviously we will prefer existing use.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when do you hope to conclude those discussions?
We think we should have an answer from the government early in next calendar year. So officials are telling me that we'll have an answer back in early January.
Okay, and that will then potentially affect the budget.
It may affect the budget, but around the same time, we are also getting the outcome of their housing infrastructure fund bid. And part of that bid is about land assembly as well. And it may just be a sort of a game of playing shops with government departments between CLG and DFT, but we are assuming that some of that HIF will be used for land assembly.
Okay. I wanted to move on to LLDC, which we seem to discuss an awful lot, I have to say, at various committees. My first question probably is more for David or Martin. Is the Moore-Stevens report on track, and is it likely to be published at the end of this month?
Chair, before I come to that, could I just say something generally about development corporations that might be helpful to the committee? I think there's a little bit of a confusion in our budget process about how we treat the development corporations. They are, of course, functional bodies of the GLA, but they get funded in really a number of different ways. You can see it in the GLA budget, you can see it in a transfer from Development Corporation Reserve, and you can see it by direct allocation of business rates from the Mayor in the group budget. And it doesn't make it very straightforward in terms of actually being clear about where responsibility for setting that budget comes from and how the money flows. So what we're proposing to do in the consultation budget, which we plan to issue just before Christmas, once the government has confirmed their provisional settlements, is move to a clear model where the funding for the development corporations comes probably from business rates at group budget level, and that the reserve we hold for development corporations is held genuinely as a what should we hold as an appropriate reserve for the reasons that one holds reserves against particular risks, rather than what it has been historically for the last few years, which is a sum of money that kind of gets drawn and smooths out money and makes it less transparent about where things are. So that's just really to give the committee a heads up about something you can expect to see in the consultation budget, which we're obviously happy to talk about. And while it is a change and that always affects kind of comparison from year to year, I do think it just will make it a lot clearer and straightforward as we talk about the budgets of these organisations and where responsibility sits. To come then to your question on Moore-Stevens, so following the meeting with Budget Monitoring Subcommittee, Martin and I met with Moore-Stevens and both expressed the views of the committee and our own views about the status. As I wrote to the chairman following that meeting, Moore-Stevens were working to a schedule to try and deliver the report to the GLA by the end of November. There were essentially two risks that I think are relevant. One is the risk that Moore-Stevens could uncover something or have an unexpected delay that could cause that to slip. As of this morning, the latest update from them is that they remain on track to do that, which is good news. The other risk I highlighted is that there could be something in the reports that requires legal consideration and legal advice to the Mayor before he'd be able to publish it. We have had, Martin's led an initial engagement with our lawyers and Moore-Stevens to discuss that. And a more detailed review of their work to date is going to happen later this week. So we're doing that, as I said in my letter, in advance rather than waiting for the report to be completed, because we're trying to mitigate this risk and because everybody, I think, is on the same page about wanting to get this published as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you. And yes, thank you for your letter that we had in advance following the subcommittee meeting. Then to looking at the financing of LLDC, I don't know whether Fiona or Martin might want to answer this. Trying to really understand the financial assistance the GLA is providing to the LLDC. Is it a loan? Is it a capital grant? Looking back, we seem to constantly be lending them money that they don't pay back, and that's, goes into the longer term that they're going to be able to. So I wonder if you can clarify that. I think there's 44.1 million in 2018-19 capital budget, but doesn't show any repayment before 2022. Just trying to get a picture on it, please.
The loans, data provided to LLDC, only that they get repaid as and when they have a net capital surplus in a year. So it's always going to be into the 20s and beyond, and that's why we're charging a long-term borrowing rate for that. All I can say, I think it's helpful to say at this stage, the numbers in the appendix in the paper are the LLDC's estimated capital financing requirement, what they think they need to spend on, and saying that their draft numbers ahead of the LLDC's own board agreeing what they want to put in the submission next week. And at this stage, we haven't finalised how much we would provide additional loan funding for, and I think at the subcommittee we had quite a good discussion that simply their plans, it won't be affordable to continue to always finance them by them, us lending, GLA lending them money and then repaying back. It'll have to come a mixture of loans and grant funding, and that work is to work out what is the best package, what's affordable, is very much ongoing, and the intention is that we'll have some clarity, we might be able to provide you clarity on those intentions when it comes to the Mayor's budget consultation paper just before Christmas.
So we'll get much more detail then and clarity.
Yes, you know, I would expect the LLDC Chief Finance Officer herself to be saying it can't all be done by borrowing. And so we've got a programme of work modelling various scenarios which we'll try and bring to a head to give some clarity, I say, in the budget consultation document, how much is loan and how much will be direct GLA funded.
Okay. One of the big issues is managing the stadium costs, as we heard at the subcommittee. What assumptions have you made in this budget about LLDC's ability to actually manage those costs?
At present, the LLDC numbers, and I say we're just using their numbers at this stage until we'll get the submission, is predicated on, I think there was a sort of a no change position, i.e. sort of a worst case position of extra capital they would have to put in over the next 4 or 5 years. And so that's what their numbers include, and therefore it's a slightly artificial position because nobody's going to sit and do nothing. But they are, in measuring, in working out, what LLDC can afford to borrow, we have to be prudent, and therefore at the moment the numbers are included, the deficit that occurred in during this year sort of continues, and that clearly will not be the case.
Right. So just run that past me again.
So I was trying to say,
you've not been very sharp there. So
maybe if we go to the table in that appendix on page 71. We've got in corporate what the LLDC are expected.
Yes, it's in corporate. It's the third line down in corporate.
Yes, on capital, and that's net position, so it's a net cost, and that is based on a worst case scenario, put it that way, of E20.
Oh, I'm not coming on this.
okay, that's the worst case.
And obviously other things related to the corporation. That
Yes,
line isn't just the stadium.
No, sorry, that's the net position of all their activities, which includes a worst case of E20. So, yeah, it's important to have that clarification.
Can I just come in on this? Because if we look at further down on the infamous page 71, 3 lines from the bottom on total GLA financing, we see the same numbers appear again. I know. Are you with me?
Yes.
Yeah. But that section indicates, as far as I can see, generation of income. So, for instance, we know that and I'll come back to that in a minute, the housing zones, we're getting that money from the DCLG, we're getting the affordable housing from the DCLG, so that's where the money's coming from to finance this expenditure, right? That's correct?
Correct.
But how can it be that we're saying that the LLDC are repaying, effectively, 49.4 thousand million, sorry, yeah, and then, but we're then giving it to them?
Well, it's trying to show this is sort of net nil for the GLA budget, and maybe we could make the presentation clearer. So over the period,
Larger, certainly.
the LLDC has a net capital requirement in the corporate lines,
yes.
the corporate line, which we've got to, which should show what they're spending. I think this is where...
This is very clear.
Yeah, I think it goes back to David's point. We've got LLDC activity
Yes.
in the GLA budget, so they've got a net expenditure requirement.
They have.
Which we're showing as spending.
But it's showing as though the way I'm reading it, of course I accept that I don't have the qualifications that you do, but the way I'm reading it is that they're giving us the money as well.
No,
but they're not, are they?
It's not, because so that's showing the net expenditure requirement, and of course the GLA has to fund that net that expenditure requirement,
yeah.
and it's showing it will be below.
So they're not repaying their loans, are they?
No,
we're actually lending.
If you split it out, there is repayments in there. That's why it's a net position,
right?
And this is why, I mean, to go to David's earlier point, is having
well, I'll continue the conversation
doesn't
offline
help.
because we could be all day. But just to help you, I have actually found where the housing bank money is shown.
Oh, right.
And it's and I think it's wishful thinking by David Lunts. Actually, it's actually consolidated with the housing zone loans.
Right.
Where he'd probably like it to be.
So this is
That's fine. Let's
yeah.
leave it there.
Except presentationally, this is not helpful.
No. Thank you.
Assemblymember Pigeon, do you want to come back?
Yes, I just want to carry on. So, LLDC isn't in a particularly healthy position. Is the GLA capable of gradually reducing financial assistance?
No.
Or is it not for the foreseeable future? Well, the loan facility or whatever we're doing for LLDC, do you see any point in the future where we can just actually reduce our financial assistance to the Olympic area?
I think, can I just build on what Martin said, and remember that there are statutory responsibilities here, both on Martin and on the Chief Finance Officer at LLDC, about only borrowing money when there's confidence it can be repaid. And it's very important to understand that, and that's why a lot of work is going on at the moment, as Martin said, to ensure that plans for future borrowing, or whether grants or whether other approaches are needed, are appropriate and and sustainable. Yeah, and remember there are two separate considerations when it comes to LDC. One is the capital side of things and all the investments that have been made in Park, with affordable housing, culture and education districts, and so on, in terms of regenerating the area and transforming it. And then there is more on the revenue side, the kind of year-on-year running costs of the park, and ensuring that in the long term, and we've talked before about at some stage the sunset of LDC, trying to get that to a sustainable place as well. So there are really two separate areas to look at there.
Okay, can I just...
Sorry,
Martin.
At present,
yes,
the Mayor has set a borrowing limit for the LLDC. And I suppose what I'm saying at the moment, it is very difficult to see how they could be increased going forward. Okay. And we've got to come to a view on that. And the part of work we're looking at is reviewing all the forecast costs, and that's so we need quite a lot of expert advice on future inflation, and then modelling the range of uncertainties there. And of course a lot of their receipts come from housing, disposable housing, so we're modelling and they're getting experts to model future house price inflation again. That's very much sort of probably crystal ball gazing, and we've got to model them, and we've got to come to a position where the LLDC CFO has to be able to satisfy her board that the LLDC can repay that borrowing. If they don't believe the borrowing can be repaid, they can't borrow, and that's the system. At the same time, I've got to keep under review how much they have borrowed, and if it looks like with changing inflation, changing house prices, changing circumstances, they can't repay, I then have to start impairing that loan. Now, neither of us want to get into that position, and so we're working collaboratively, taking expert advice and as appropriate to get to a model to come to view, be able to myself to advise yourself and the mayor what is a prudent for a borrowing limit for the LLDC, and therefore if the mayor still wants the LLDC to do more than that level of borrowing can afford, it then falls. You'd have to find other sources of funding, or either directly for other capital expenditure, or to give to the LLDC to save up to repay the borrowing. It's all the same end result.
Okay. How many staff do LLDC have?
120 from memory.
It's about 120.
Okay.
Direct.
Do you have a breakdown what all these people do? Because it's quite way in progress. It seems quite a high number of staff in some ways. It'd be great if perhaps you can break down, because you were talking about needing experts to do these calculations. Well, presumably if they've got 120 staff, they've got some resource within that. But I wonder whether we could ask for that, because I think that might help us with our work in the new year. The final area I wanted to ask you about is E20. There's a 200 million provision for future losses in E20's accounts. We had some concerns about how E20 operates. Last night there was an extraordinary meeting of the board of LLDC. No paperwork has been published, which goes against the sort of transparency of this administration. But item 3 was about the future ownership of E20 Stadium LLP. I'm wondering if you could update us on their financial position and perhaps any outcome from last night's discussions.
Martin, do you want to explain the financial position around the £200 million, and then I can build on that?
The financial position, and I think is discussing of 200 million, and I think we're discussing that other committee to the Assembly, is an accounting estimate of the cost of what they call onerous contracts that the partnership has. And so it's an estimate, again, driven by accounting standards, which at present you've got contracts you're making losses on. The contracts these run for over 50 years, 99 years, depending on the type of contracts. At the appropriate, using the discount factor, what's the total, shall we say, loss on those contracts? What do you need to make provision for? It's what I say is an accounting standard, because it then assumes that you take no action. What you've got now, you just let run on over that period. But it is showing, you could say, a worst case liability if you did nothing on the contracts.
It is making a loss every year.
Yes, in fact, the share of, we talk about the onerous contracts and the write down of the value of the stadium was all included in the GLA accounts that was published earlier this year. Yeah.
Okay.
In terms,
I'm going to say, but that's not a revenue account loss. That is the sum of the losses you're making on those contracts over the length of those contracts. So in the case of the West Ham, it's over 99 years.
and then building on that and to the other part of your question, Caroline, E20 clearly was established with a view to transforming the stadium and operating it, at a minimum at break even, but ideally at a small surplus to start repaying some of the costs of transition. That clearly, self-evidently, isn't how it turned out, hence the Moss-Stevens review that we've already discussed to give full transparency to Londoners on what went on there. As we discussed at Budget Monitoring Subcommittee when LDC were alongside us, a load of work is going on around the circumstances the partnership finds itself in, because we don't want these continuing losses to continue, and we need to learn both from the experience we've had since the partnership was formed and also the financial outcome that we've had, and start addressing that. That's what I understand the LDC board was discussing yesterday evening. It's inevitable in discussions of this nature that aspects of it relate to commercial position with partners involved in the stadium, and as such, while clearly the base agenda of a meeting would be public, the paper that would discuss those things would be confidential for a period of time while there are legitimate commercial interests to protect in the normal way of public sector business. And so that's what was happening. Clearly the outcome of that meeting and any decisions that the Mayor wishes to take consequent to that will be communicated as and when conclusions are reached.
There's nothing else you can share with us from last night's discussions? No. Okay, thank you.
I saw Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you. Yeah, just first of all, I'll just for the record declare that I'm a West Ham supporter, that I've got no prejudicial interest. I don't own any shares or anything. Just out of interest, we can continue to loan the LLDC money, really, based on their asset base, can't we? It's not just their ability to repay, it's also, it's a bit like a mortgage, isn't it? You know, if your home is worth 100 million, well, let's say 500 million pounds, £500,000, you can borrow, £400,000 quite safely, can't you?
But the thing is, they have to have the income stream to repay the borrowing, and under the present model, their asset base is either is the means, and that comes from them disposing the land to developers who then develop the house, or coming to arrangements where they have where there's some rental schemes. But unless they sell to developers in one shape or form, they haven't got the money for us, for the GLA to be repaid. But I'm going to say, so if the GLA still wanted those outcomes, it's going to have to do some direct funding.
Yeah, because the part of the problem is around affordable housing, isn't it? Because the latest deal that the LLDC have done actually falls below the Mayor's basic 35% affordable housing. They've had to do that deal in order to get some income. And there is a question around where are the mayoral priorities? Is it around enabling the LLDC to get a return in order to repay the loans that they have, or is it a case that the Mayor wants to stick to his 35%, but actually, when it comes to mayoral land, it should be 50%? How do they deal with those challenges?
So I think what you're referring to is developments that were already agreed under the previous administration, and the affordable housing provision in those is what it is, because that was something relevant to the previous administration's decisions. As we talked about at Budget Monitoring Subcommittee a few weeks ago, in terms of future developments that the Mayor has control over, there is the development on Stratford Waterfront, which is not about affordable housing because it's about providing income to the wider benefits of the Culture and Education District, as we talked about, and the financing of that. And then that leaves us with two significant sites at Pudding Mill Lane and Rick Roberts Way. And it absolutely is the Mayor's intention that those sites should provide 50% affordable housing, and the work that is ongoing is about how to align that, which is clearly very much an imperative for Londoners, given the state of the housing market, with the financial envelope the LDC operates in, there's been quite a lot of work and creative work going on to find ways to address that. And as that work concludes, as Martin sets out, hopefully we'll be able to explain how we're moving forward on both fronts, and we've got a model that enables us to meet the Mayor's aspirations on affordable housing, whilst also operating within the financial constraints that LLDC must abide by.
So what you're saying is that future developments, except for the one that's linked to the education, we understand that, will be on a 50% basis. That's what you're saying, is it?
Yeah, that's what we're working to achieve.
And then can I just ask one, it's true though, isn't it? That will have a detrimental effect on the returns that the LLDC can expect from that land, won't it?
Yeah, we are modelling what is the impact, but we're also modelling what can we do in compensation of densities. Well, say we, the housing development experts are modelling that. So it is one factor. Yeah.
So it may lead to higher densities, for instance. Is that what you're saying?
Just the existing plan permission was granted quite a few years ago. I think people are just reviewing what is possible.
But ultimately, all of that will affect the, if I can use the term incorrectly, the asset value.
Yeah. The biggest
and the amount of which they may or may not be able to borrow against. Yeah. Is that right?
The other important variable, and you could say it's working against what we're trying to achieve, is time, because obviously the Mayor wants to deliver at least 50% affordable housing. Quite and right. He wants to accelerate that if at all possible, as the returns are in fact sort of capital receipts. Taking an early receipt, it does reduce the potential receipt as well. So we've got those two variables at play.
Because ultimately there's only the finite value of the park, isn't there? Well, there has a finite value, and the fact that we're pressing ahead. I understand the political motivation, but the fact that we're pressing ahead with 50% affordable, the fact that we're accelerating the projects, both of those have a detrimental effect on the asset value of the park. Is that right?
We need to talk about the asset value of the park. I think we've got to play in. You're trying to build a place. So in that narrow aspect, yes, you'll have less cash from your receipts over that period of time, but the benefits
because ultimately,
will be commensurate.
Ultimately, as I understand it, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, the amount of money that we're loaning the LLDC, we're expecting to get back from capital receipts, aren't we?
Yes, correct.
But what is happening here in relation to the 50% affordable and the speeding up is reducing the amount of those capital receipts. So the question ultimately is, as a result of those two mayoral decisions, which politically is quite a liberty to make, does that put at risk the ability of the park to repay the loans?
At present, there is no, we don't judge there's any risks in the ability to pay the existing loan. As I tried to say earlier, we're modelling what can be done going forward, i.e. to what extent could the existing facility be increased, or where should the cap be? But neither myself or my counterpart at the LLDC are saying that the existing borrowing cap is too high.
Okay.
Okay, just before we move off the LLDC, I'm not sure who would answer this. I suspect maybe Mr. Bellamy. The Chief Executive, David Goldstone, is about to depart. Where are we at in terms of recruiting a successor?
The process is underway. From memory, interviews take place in December, and obviously we have, it may well be that when the appointment, obviously it always takes a little time post-interview to formalise and make the appointment, and then, depending on the successful candidate, there may be some form of notice period. So we have Jerry Murphy, who's the Deputy Chief Executive, will act as interim Chief Executive, and I know she's been working very closely alongside David, which of course she does anyway, but particularly in the last few weeks, so that she's basically all the key things David's been doing, she's been doing alongside him, so that she's personally cited, and that we have a smooth process there.
It feels like it's been a long time that I personally have known about David leaving, but what's David's notice period?
David's, he's working I think about a 4-month notice period is what was agreed. It was basically a case of himself and Peter Hendy as his manager agreeing when was the appropriate point to leave given the work programme that was in place, and the conclusion that Peter and David reached in analysing that was that end of November was the appropriate time to do that.
I'm assuming, maybe I'm wrong, and correct me if I am, that there is someone who's headhunting for this role, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Have you had advice back from whoever it is that you're using as to the likely notice period of candidates that they are putting forward for this role?
Possibly. It's an LDC, it's Peter Hendy to lead the recruitment process. So while I have spoken to the recruitment agency to discuss my perspective on the types of candidate and types of skills that the LDC needs at this point in time, the mechanics of the process have been led out of LDC.
That's fine. And at that level, my expectation would be at least 6 months would be the notice period. It does vary, of course, because you can find some people that are immediately available, but it's rare.
Absolutely, there is a risk of that. Equally, one of the things about 6-month notice periods is, do you want, as the employer where somebody is leaving, do you want that person to remain in post for 6 months? Are they going to still be motivated, or is it just actually better for all round for them to tidy up things and move on? And that's always the sorts of discussions that happen in such situations.
These things are all up for negotiation. The reason for asking the question, well, two reasons. I'm a little bit surprised that the interviews aren't happening until December, bearing in mind the length of time that we've known that David was leaving. So I'm wondering why the process sort of started a bit earlier. But more importantly, I'm thinking about the stability of the organisation going forward. So we could be leaderless there for 6 months, conceivably. I do take the point that you made about Jerry Murphy standing in the interim, and she's been attending everything that David does, so that she is as beefed up to step into that role if she has to in the short term. Are you confident that the organisation will not be destabilised by David's departure without a successor in place?
Yeah, I mean, I would not regard the organisation as leaderless. Firstly, it has a chair who you all know well, and is well embedded into that role. Secondly, Jerry is a very experienced member of the team there and very capable, and more than confident in her abilities to take on that role. And I also would say that there's a strong, experienced leadership team there. It's not like there's been a lot of churn and a load of new faces on that team. And so, I'm confident in that position. Okay. We've got one final question for Fiona Fletcher-Smith, and then we're going to move on to the final lap.
Yes, Fiona, I want to pick up adult education with you. Doesn't seem to be any funding in the draft core budget for adult education, though we know from previous stuff that preparatory work is going to be needed if this funding is going to be devolved to City Hall. Can you advise what funding you're seeking from government to cover preparations, or whether there might be a shift in the next version we see?
Yes, we have put a business case to government. We did that in September for what we're calling transition funding, which would cover the current year we're in and the year before, so next year, before we get the devolution of the adult skills budget. We have a meeting coming up with senior officials at the Department for Education in about a week's time, and we should get an indication then of how much and when. We're fairly confident we will get what we're asking for, which is about 1.4 million per year. And as I say, it'll be about a week or so before we have positive noises. But we're also working very closely with the other combined authorities on this, because we're all in the same position. So particularly Greater Manchester have put in a similar size bid for transition money.
Okay, that's fine, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we're now on to the final section. Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. The final left. In the absence of Mr. Jacobs, I think I'll direct my questions to you, Martin.
It's probably both, but might be more Fiona.
Depends on what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, in which case I won't.
See how we go.
I was going to say that Fiona could go, but if she's needed.
I've got Jeff's briefing.
We're going to have to call her Jeff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anything goes these days. Karen.
The Mayor quite rightly has a set of social integration priorities. In fact, earlier this year, a consultation exercise was carried out around his vision for a diverse and inclusive city. Where do you see the money for carrying out these priorities coming from? What outcomes do you expect? And much more importantly, how do you intend monitoring these outcomes?
Yes, the diversity and inclusion strategy was published earlier this year. Consultation on that finished in mid-September. So that will be the main document that will inform the work of the team going forward. So just to say, the sense is that existing resource, which is about 665,000, is sufficient to deal with what we want to do. From the vision document, you'll be very conscious that a lot of the vision in this area is actually supplied by things like the housing strategy in terms of affordable housing, in terms of the Mayor's transport strategy, in terms of accessibility. So lots of the work is diffuse across the organisation. So with the 665,000 of existing resource, what the team have been doing, and it's very much work in progress, is working on the scope of actual actions that will flow from the vision document. And that is work in progress that will inform their work programme for existing resource.
So I think you probably answered my next question. You see the outcomes being monitored against the six points, the 6 key areas around which the consultation was organised.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. And how many staff work in this particular section?
Pass.
What I'd say,
I know there's a post that we advertised earlier this year.
I can't remember the answer, but what I can say is that the area was restructured and the Oversight Committee was consulted about that. And so if you go back through the Oversight Committee back papers, you'll get detail on the structure. Of course, it then takes some time to fill out those positions. I'm not sure that every single position has been filled yet, but that will set out the detail for you.
Right, yeah, I was thinking more in terms of the staff directly employed, but clearly some of the work is mainstreamed across other departments.
Yes, there's a small core policy team, and then, as I say, my own team in planning, environment.
Right, okay, I get the picture.
This is everybody's agenda.
Fine. To move on, Chair, again, the Mayor has appointed the Chief Digital Officer. What resources are provided for him? And again, what objectives have you set him for the year ahead?
So the Chief Digital Officer is beginning a process of consultation on a work programme, essentially a Smart London plan. And so he's at the moment having started work, got his feet under the table, done the introductory meetings, etc. He's now starting to scope that out, and will be then consulting listening exercises, etc. With a view to finalising that next spring. So that is underway. In terms of budget, obviously a lot of the approach for this area is about partnerships and about bringing people together to do things rather than necessarily put in large amounts of money in directly. At this early stage, there are probably 2 particular areas where focus is going to come, which may have fiscal impact. One is around cyber security, which is a very important area for London. Already, MOPAC provides funding to the London Digital Security Centre, which provides advice and support for small businesses in London in that area. And so discussions are going to happen between the Chief Digital Officer and MOPAC around that initiative and how we can build on what's happened there. And then the other side is the London Office of Technology and Innovation, which has been running as a pilot, some support out of GLA funds, also supports from boroughs and other organisations, and it will be a question of looking at how that will come forward.
Okay. Just moving on, in terms of 2 events, the the IPC World Athletics Championship and the IAF World Championships, how much funding did the GLA commit to the IPC World Athletics Championship earlier this year? And how much is it expecting from the share of the event surplus?
Mm-hmm. So I forget the number about how much we actually committed in for the event. The IPC event, we were at the GLA decision of the previous mayor to underwrite that event, and so that in the event of it reaching a loss, which it always was expected to do, we would do that, meet that. Where we are at the moment is that obviously the event has happened, very successful they were too. The organising company is now finalising its accounts and its final position. I believe there's a meeting of their audit committee this afternoon which will help to move that on, although I think there are still some outstanding issues. So what essentially we will see is a loss on IPC and a surplus on the IAAF. Now, we have already provided the funding for the events to happen, and so we are not expecting, obviously there's going to be some tidying up and accountants doing what accountants do, but we're not expecting any material further expenditure for these events out of the major events reserve. Rather, the question is about the surplus from the IAAF and then that coming back to us. Now, for both events, the position is slightly complicated because we would provide our funding support as it was needed rather than just handing over a lump of cash and then there being the profit which we could take a share of. But we do expect there will be some surplus to come back in a cash sense. In an accounting sense, the agreement around the IAAF was that we would receive the first £1.5 million of surplus, reflecting our support for the IPC event, and then we would receive a third of any further surplus based on that. And so at the moment, and as I say, this is not finalised, the IAAF as an event is expected to return a surplus of about £6 million, which implies that it could be something approaching £3 million would be our share of that surplus. Some of that, effectively, we will already have in the major event reserve because we wouldn't have needed to put over cash right at the end because they would have had enough cash, they're going to make a profit. But some of that then will come back and will come into the major events reserve.
Thank you for that. Right, final question, and then we're almost done. The External Affairs team last year received additional funding of £2.4 million, and there's provision made in the budget for more resource this year. 2 additional posts, I understand, in the press office. Why do we need those people, and what responsibilities will they have?
So it's firstly worth noting the External Affairs team last year, the increases were not about staffing in the press office. We left that as it was.
No, this one.
Yeah, but whereas this year it's felt necessary to do that. And that's in response to the workload that the team are, and the strain that the team are under. I think that's shown most principally in the response to the terrorist attacks and the other incidents we've seen during this year, where the team have been working literally all hours, and it's been a real strain on them as individuals. It was certainly personally apparent to me following the Grenfell Tower fire that where we wanted to provide support to London Local Authority Gold on the comms side, and it was really very difficult for the team to provide that support just because of the level of strain that was on them. And also just generally other factors like Brexit, increased devolution, all the housing work has just all generally increased the pressures on that team. And so, the decision Jeff reached as head of paid service was that more resources needed there. He doesn't want to commit to permanently growing the size of the team unless this turns out to be very much a long-term situation, and that's why he approved two fixed-term posts to address the immediate situation and allow us to see over time how the pressures on that team go and whether they stick at that level or whether they abate.
Okay. How many press officers are you now funding?
Couldn't tell you that. I would have to write.
Could we, we'll request that information afterwards when we do the usual.
Yeah.
The question is,
if we could have a look at how that's grown over maybe the last 5 years as well, that would be quite informative. I think members might be quite interested in that.
Chair, if we got the whole picture, press, public relations, events.
Yes, just to understand the picture.
And also the Mayor's office have got their own press team as well.
So to be clear, we're specifically here talking about the press team, which is the press team that works to the Mayor. We don't have a distinct press team in the Mayor's office. In terms of the wider external affairs, again, there was consultation on the structure of that team on the marketing side, event side, digital side, etc., with the Oversight Committee last year. I know the Assistant Director attended and answered the Oversight Committee's questions on that. So the Assembly already has that information in the papers from that Oversight Committee meeting. And what we can do is, if that didn't cover the press side, because no changes were proposed at that stage for the press team, we can write and supplement that information.
Thank you for that. Okay, members, we have reached the end of this discussion. Can I thank the guests for attending what's turned out to be quite a long meeting and for the answers that they've given. Can we note the discussion that we just had? Thank you, members. Just a couple of items of business left on the agenda. Item 6 is the committee work programme. We're recommended to note the work programme for the remainder of this Assembly year and to delegate authority to me in consultation with past group leads and Assembly Member Pidgeon in the usual way to agree the 2017 pre-budget report. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much, members. Item 7, the date of the next meeting will be on 3rd of January 2018 at 10 o'clock in the morning here. There will be an additional meeting of the Budget Monitoring Subcommittee on the 13th of December at 2 o'clock in here to discuss the London Stadium. And as before, when we had that subject, all members are entitled to attend if they wish. If you can just let us know if you want to come to that, you can do. You may want to, because it's obviously an interesting subject. Item 8, any other business. There is a supplementary paper that was circulated in advance. I would move the recommendation on that. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you, members. One final word before we close the meeting. This is actually our scrutiny manager, Lucy Pickering's final meeting at the Budget Monitoring Committee. She'll be at the subcommittee in December. She's been indispensable to the work of this committee, and I'd like to record our thanks for everything that she has done and to wish her good fortune in her new role at the Department of International Development. Okay, with that, members, the meeting is closed. Thank you.
GLA, Chamber, Sound.